everybody, it's Chase here at Rocky Mountain. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today. Quick little top 5 tips video, and today it's all about your handlebars and your lever setup on your dirt bike. And this is gonna be more motocross specific, but the reason I bring this up is we're here today at Mosquito MX, we're at the RMX Academy, and it surprises me how often I see riders that are just getting into motocross have some pretty wanky setups, talking about bars that are too far forward, too wide, or just weird lever positions. So first things first, start off, give yourself the best chance to improve the most by having a good setup. So let's talk about handlebars. Tip number 1 is just making sure you have a good handlebar bend, especially if you buy a bike used. Don't just take the bar that was on there and assume that's gonna be good for you. Everybody's a little bit taller. Some guys prefer things a little bit different. And we've done a video with Chris Kiefer talking about handlebar bends, but ultimately me, 5'7". I'm a short guy, right? So I really like the ODI RC4 handlebar just because it's a lower bend, so it's not real tall, and it's got a little bit more sweep. It comes a little bit more toward me. And that to me is just a comfortable handlebar bend for a rider of my height. Riders that are a little bit taller, you might want a bar that has a little bit more rise or maybe a little bit wider, and we'll talk about that. But don't just accept that the bars are the best for you that came on your bike. Experiment a little bit. If you're a taller rider, you can go with a little bit taller bar, but if you're a little bit shorter, a lower bar with a little bit more back sweep might be a little bit better for you. Tip number 2 with your handlebar setup is how far forward or back should your handlebars be? Now, the vast majority of riders, what I see, the most common is gonna be even with your fork tubes. I like to roll mine back actually just a little bit. I was just talking to Gavin Bruff, who's about 5'10". He actually likes to roll his handlebars back a little bit as well. But the big thing I don't want to see is riders with your bars rolled too far forward, and here's why. When your bars are too far forward, when you're riding, whether you're coming into a corner, you're accelerating out, or even if you're standing up, the farther your bars are more forward, the harder it is to get your chest and the front of your body over the bike, and it causes a lot of arm pump because as you're coming out of corners, your hands are farther extended out, and you're holding on to the bike versus having your bars up underneath your chest and driving forward. And so if you struggle with arm pump, look at your bar position. So I would say start out with a neutral or slightly rolled back. I like mine rolled back just a little bit because I feel that when I'm standing up going through a corner or sitting down, doesn't matter. I feel like having the bars a little bit farther back allows me to get my bars. I feel like they're sitting in my lap, helps me keep the bike leaned over. And again, it just helps me stay over the front of the bike when I'm accelerating out of corners. Tip number 3 is gonna be your handlebar width. This one's important. I've put bars on my bike before that I didn't measure, and I went and rode with them, and I couldn't figure out why the heck I felt like I couldn't corner a dirt bike anymore. It was the weirdest thing. And so what I realized is that the bars that I put on were like 810 millimeters wide. They were just too wide for me, and it was harder to lean the bike over. And I see young riders that are maybe just stepping up to a 250F or maybe a 252 stroke 125, and they get a full-size bar on there, and they're like 5'5". You do not need a handlebar that is that wide. And if you've only been riding a bar and you don't know any different, well, you're not gonna know any different, right? It's just that's what you're used to. But what I would recommend is the sweet spot for most riders, unless you're on the taller range, like maybe 6'2 plus, is about 800 to 805 millimeters of width. If your bars are wider than that, I would recommend cutting them down a few mils on each side. I know for like East Coast off-road racers, they like to cut their bars down even narrower because you're going through tight wooded areas. But 800 to 805 is kind of the sweet spot. That's right where these RC4 bars sit. That to me, it's a good width where it feels stable, but it helps me lean the bike. So look at your handlebar width, make sure it's not too wide for you. In fact, like Benny Bloss, like 6'5", 6'6", he runs a standard handlebar width. He doesn't run anything crazy wide. All right, tip number 4, we're gonna move on to levers now. Handlebar lever position. This is one where sometimes I see bikes and I just don't understand how the heck you can even ride a motorcycle like that. I see clutch levers that are way down here, brake levers that are way up or way far out. So tip number 1 is just have your levers in a good neutral position. Everyone's gonna have a little bit of a preference, but I would say a good starting point is just slightly lower than even with your handlebars or with your grips. I like to have a clutch and brake position more comfortable for when I'm sitting down, because for me, I tend to use the clutch more often sitting down going through corners than I do standing up. And most often when I'm standing up on a track, I'm in the attack position, I'm accelerating, I'm not worried about pulling in my clutch. Brake, for me, I like to have my lever in as close to the bar as I can get it, just so I'm not overextending my fingers so I can squeeze the grips a little bit better. But just a good even or slightly down is a good starting point, and then you can tweak it from there. Tip number 5 is just bring your levers in on the handlebars. The reason I say that is because, especially on a 450, clutch pull can be pretty stiff on these big guys. So moving your bars in will give you more leverage out towards the end of the lever, and that's gonna make your clutch pull slightly easier. Same thing goes with your front brake. If you wanna have more power when you squeeze it, the farther you grab on the outside, it's gonna give you more leverage. So the less firm you have to pull it to get the same amount of stopping power. And then what's also nice about moving those in is you're much less likely to break your levers if you go down in a crash, because they're not the first thing contacting the ground if you do fall over. And that's it. Those are my top 5 handlebar and lever positions. Quick little recap. Find a bend that's gonna be comfortable for you. You don't want it too tall. You don't need it too low. Make sure that they're in a good neutral or maybe slightly back position. Off-road riders, you might be a little bit different. Width, make sure you've got a width that is set up for you. You don't want a bar that's overly wide. For me, it just makes it more difficult to corner. Levers, either even or slightly down as a starting point, and then move those puppies in. If you ever look at the Lawrence brothers, their levers are so far in when they grab them, they're barely grabbing the very ends. Those are my top 5 tips. Hopefully they've helped you out. If you have comments or questions, I'd love to hear your feedback. What have you done setup-wise with your bars and levers that have helped you out? Leave that in the comment section below. And as always, if you want to see more riding tip videos like this, get subscribed to the Rocky Mountain YouTube channel. I'm Chase. We'll see you on the trails.